Welcome to Midnight Whispers, where true crime meets the quiet hush of night. Close your eyes, breathe deep, and let every word drift through the dark. Tonight, we return to a place where silence remembers. This is the story of the candle in room 9. It sits there still at the edge of Willow Creek, a tired little motel, its paint long surrendered to wind and time. The Willow Creek Motel once welcomed travelers from the highway, truckers, salesmen, and lost souls in need of a bed for the night. But now, it sleeps under a blanket of ivy and silence. The only thing that moves is a sign out front, creaking faintly as the wind passes through its rusted hinges. If you drive by on Halloween night, and most don't, you'll see a small light glowing in one of the upstairs windows. Room 9. A single candle, burning steady and soft, though no one has checked into that room for over 40 years. Locals call it the candle that never burns out. The flame is not bright enough to guide a traveler, not wild enough to frighten children. It's gentle, like a breath that refuses to fade. Moths circle the window, brushing their wings against cracked glass, and each year, as midnight approaches, the same quiet scene repeats. A candle's glow in a place where no hand dares to light it. The townsfolk of Willow Creek have learned not to ask too many questions. But once in a while, usually at the diner over coffee, someone new will ask, "Why does that candle burn every Halloween?" And the regulars will look at each other, half smiling, half shivering. Then someone, usually old Mrs. Carter, who's lived here since before the motel shut down, will say softly, "Because that's the night Evelyn Moore came and never left." Evelyn Moore. The name still lingers in this town like the echo of a hymn. No one knew much about her, where she came from, why she stopped here, or what she was running from. But everyone remembers what happened after. Back in 1979, Willow Creek was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. The sheriff's office handled little more than fender benders and the occasional stolen lawnmower. Halloween was for kids and caramel apples, not ghost stories. Until Evelyn checked into room 9. The night she arrived, the sky was heavy with rain. That slow, endless kind of rain that feels like it's washing something away. The highway stretched quiet under a pale moon, and the motel's neon sign blinked in weary red letters, vacancy. Frank Dillard, the motel clerk, remembered the sound of her footsteps first. Light, hurried, almost apologetic. He would later tell the sheriff that she seemed scared. Not the kind of scare that comes from being lost, but the kind that comes from being followed. She was polite, though, paid in cash. Signed the register in neat handwriting. Evelyn M. Moore. When Frank handed her the key to room 9, she asked for a candle. He told her there was a lamp inside, but she shook her head. "I sleep better by candlelight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Frank thought nothing of it at the time. Just another traveler, he figured, trying to forget the world for one night. But there was something in her eyes, that faraway look, like she'd already said goodbye to everything that mattered. That night, guests in the nearby rooms claimed they heard faint crying. One couple said they heard it through the walls, soft, rhythmic, almost like a prayer. But when Frank checked on her the next morning, she smiled and said she just had a bad dream. By the next evening, the rain had stopped. The moon came out, pale and watchful, and that's when things started to change. Frank noticed a car parked by the edge of the lot, a dark sedan, unfamiliar, with mud splashed across the license plate. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a trench coat. He didn't come inside at first, just stood there, looking up at room 9. Frank remembered the man's face only vaguely, the kind you forget right after you see it. But his eyes, they were cold, too calm. When he finally walked into the lobby, his shoes left a trail of wet dirt. He asked for Evelyn by name. Frank hesitated. Something about his tone felt wrong, not worried, not kind. More like he was asking about something that belonged to him. That was the last time anyone saw Evelyn Moore alive. When she didn't check out the next morning, Frank knocked on her door. No answer. The candle was still burning on the windowsill. Its flame was steady, as if untouched by time. Frank called the sheriff, and when they finally opened the room, the bed was neatly made, the window slightly open, and the candle still glowing. Her suitcase was there, clothes folded neatly inside, but her purse, her coat, and Evelyn herself gone. No one could explain it. There was no sign of struggle, no fingerprints, nothing, just that single candle, still alive with light. In the years that followed, the motel closed, and room 9 was locked for good. But the candle never went out. Every Halloween, at the same hour Evelyn arrived, just past 11, it begins to flicker once more. Some say it's just a reflection, a trick of the glass. Others say Frank returns each year to relight it, though Frank's been gone for decades. But if you stand close enough, if you listen to the whispering wind outside that old motel, you might hear it too, a faint sigh from inside the room, like someone breathing just behind the curtain. And if you're patient, you might see the flame bend slightly, as if acknowledging you. No one knows why it burns, only that it always will, because somewhere in that little room above the empty highway, Evelyn Moore's story is still waiting to be told. The night Evelyn Moore arrived, Willow Creek seemed to pause. Rain fell the way old records crackle, steady, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The road that led to the motel shimmered under the downpour, a silver ribbon curling through miles of pine and silence. There were no cars behind her, no headlights ahead, just the hum of her engine and the quiet ache of her thoughts. She had been driving for hours. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, as though the road itself might slip away if she let go. The wipers moved back and forth in tired repetition, revealing fleeting glimpses of the world. Trees bent low, road signs smeared with rain, and finally, a faint red glow in the distance. Willow Creek Motel vacancy. The letters blinked unevenly through the storm, half broken, half alive. She pulled into the lot, her tires crunching over gravel. The rain softened into mist as she stepped out, clutching a worn leather suitcase and a small handbag. Her coat was soaked, her hair clinging to her cheeks. She hesitated beneath the flickering neon, glancing once over her shoulder, down the dark highway, as though expecting someone to follow. But there was only emptiness. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and dust. The clerk, Frank Dillard, looked up from behind the counter. He was in his late 30s, a kind man with tired eyes and a habit of humming to fill silence. The motel had maybe 3 guests that night, a traveling salesman, an old couple heading south, and now, this quiet woman. "Evening, ma'am," he said, setting down his newspaper. "Rough weather out there." She smiled faintly. "I've seen worse." Her voice was calm, polite, but there was a tremor beneath it, like the echo of a cry that hadn't yet left her throat. Frank slid the guest register toward her. "We've got plenty of rooms. You want upstairs or ground floor?" "Upstairs, please," she said. "Something far from the office, if that's all right." "Sure thing. Room 9's open." She signed her name carefully, Evelyn M. Moore. Her handwriting was graceful but deliberate, like someone trying to convince the world she was steady. As Frank handed her the key, she asked softly, "Do you happen to have a candle?" He blinked. "A candle? I can't sleep with the light," she explained quickly. "But I don't like complete darkness either." He nodded, rummaging through a drawer until he found a small white candle from an old power outage kit. She thanked him, her eyes lowering, and slipped it into her coat pocket as though it were something precious. When she left the lobby, Frank watched her climb the creaky stairs, her steps barely making a sound. She paused at the landing, looked toward the far window, and for a moment she froze. Outside, the rain had thinned to drizzle, and through the haze of streetlights, she could swear she saw the faint outline of a car, headlights off, parked across the road. Watching, she turned away quickly and disappeared into room 9. Frank thought nothing of it then, but later, when he replayed that night in his mind, after the sheriff, after the search, after everything, he would remember the way she looked up at him before closing her door. There was a question in her eyes. Not will I be safe, but will you believe me if I'm not? Inside room 9, Evelyn placed her suitcase on the bed and lit the candle. The flame flickered weakly at first, struggling against the draft sneaking through the window pane. She cupped her hands around it, whispering softly, something like a prayer or a promise. The light steadied and she exhaled. The room was small, floral curtains, faded wallpaper, the hum of the refrigerator from the hallway. On the dresser, a mirror reflected the candlelight, doubling its glow. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. She took off her coat, revealing a pale blue blouse and faint bruises along her wrists. She rubbed them absently, as though the pain were somewhere far away. Then she sat by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. From her handbag, she pulled out a photograph, folded and worn. It showed a man and a woman standing beside a car, smiling stiffly for the camera. The man's arm was around her shoulders, but her body leaned away just slightly, almost invisible to casual eye. Evelyn traced the man's face with her thumb. Then she tore the picture in half. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. In the next room, the old couple turned off their TV. The hallway light flickered, and from somewhere below, the lobby radio began to hum with static. Frank locked up for the night around 10. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the counter, reading. Occasionally, he thought he heard something. Footsteps upstairs, the faint creak of the floor. But motels always have noises. They breathe differently at night. Around 11:30, a phone rang. Room 9. Frank frowned. No one had called that room. He picked up a lobby receiver and heard a faint sound, like someone whispering on the other end. Then the line went dead. He hesitated, listening to the storm, and finally wrote it off as a cross wire. Upstairs, Evelyn sat in bed, staring at the candle. The flame's reflection shimmered across the mirror, doubling until the room looked filled with light. But she wasn't looking at the candle anymore. She was staring at the window, at the dark shape just beyond the glass. It was there for only a moment, a shadow, a man's silhouette, watching. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, pulling the curtain closed. The candle wavered but didn't go out. She reached for the bedside phone, then stopped. Who would she call? Who would believe her? Instead, she blew out the candle and sat in darkness, listening. The rain had stopped now. The silence was louder. Somewhere outside, a car door closed. Evelyn closed her eyes. She whispered something again, not a prayer this time, but a name. Then she laid down, fully dressed, clutching the torn photograph to her chest. Downstairs, Frank turned the lobby sign off and locked the doors. He never saw the car leave. And by morning, the candle in room 9 was burning again, steady, calm, and waiting. The rain had stopped by morning, but the world still felt soaked in silence. Mist rose from the highway, curling around the pines like breath from something unseen. The Willow Creek Motel glistened faintly under the pale October sun. It was a quiet day. Too quiet, Frank thought, even for this side of town. He'd slept little. The phone call from room 9 lingered in his mind. Maybe a bad line, he told himself. Maybe Evelyn had meant to call someone else. Still, when he poured coffee for the few remaining guests that morning, he couldn't shake the image of that soft voice in the static, the one that didn't quite sound like hers. By noon, the rain clouds thinned. The air smelled of wet earth and old wood. Frank stepped outside to smoke, leaning against a railing that overlooked the parking lot. That's when he saw it. A car parked near the edge of the gravel drive. It wasn't there the night before. A dark brown sedan, its paint dull, one headlight cracked. The license plate was spattered with mud, almost unreadable. He squinted, thinking maybe a guest had arrived early, but the car was empty. He stubbed out his cigarette and went back inside, trying to ignore the unease creeping up his neck. At around 3 o'clock, the motel door creaked open. The bell above it gave a weak jingle. The man who stepped in looked like he'd come from another time. Tall, shoulders square beneath a long brown trench coat, hat pulled low enough to hide his eyes. His shoes left small puddles on the linoleum floor, and his gloved hand rested casually on the counter. Frank straightened. "Afternoon," he said. "Looking for a room?" The man didn't answer right away. He glanced around the lobby, slow, deliberate. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but cold. "I'm looking for someone." Frank tried to keep his tone light. "Well, depends who you're looking for." The man's eyes lifted then, pale, sharp, unblinking. "Evelyn Moore," he said. Frank froze. His fingers tightened around the coffee cup he'd been holding. "Can I ask who's asking?" The man smiled, or maybe it was only a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "I'm her husband." A single drop of rain fell from his hat brim onto the counter. Frank hesitated. His stomach turned heavy. He remembered the faint bruises on Evelyn's wrists, the trembling in her voice when she asked for candle. Something inside him whispered that this man wasn't looking to take her home, at least not safely. "She's not in right now," Frank said carefully. "Went into town, I think." The man's gaze didn't waver. "You're sure?" Frank nodded. "Pretty sure. Want to leave a message?" The man tapped his gloved fingers against the counter. The sound was slow, rhythmic, like a ticking clock. Then he said softly, "No, I'll wait." Without another word, he turned and walked back outside. Through the lobby window, Frank watched him cross the lot, stop beside his car and light a cigarette. He didn't get in, didn't drive away, just stood there, smoke curling into mist, eyes fixed on the second-floor window, on room 9. Hours passed. Evening came again, painting the motel in shades of gold and shadow. The other guests checked out or went into town for dinner. Only the man in the trench coat remained unmoving. Frank called up the stairs once, pretending to check on a maintenance issue. Evelyn's door didn't open. No reply. He stood at the bottom step, listening. Then he heard it. Faintly, the soft shuffle of feet, the sound of something dragging across the floor, and a whisper, a woman's whisper. He couldn't make out the words. Just a rhythm, uneven, scared. He told himself it was none of his business. But the thought of that man outside, waiting, made the air inside feel smaller, heavier. By 9, the fog rolled back in. Street lights flickered. The sedan's headlights finally blinked on, flooding the lot with pale white light. Then, just as suddenly, they went dark again. When Frank went to close up for the night, he found the lobby door slightly ajar. He frowned, pushing it open, and there, sitting on the front desk, was a cigarette still burning, smoke curling into the air. He looked outside. The car was gone. Relief washed through him, brief and fragile. He turned to lock the door and then froze. Upstairs, in the window of room 9, the candle was burning again. It hadn't been there minutes ago. Evelyn had told him she'd blown it out before heading into town earlier that afternoon. Yet now it stood on the sill, its flame small but unwavering. Frank climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under his weight. "Miss Moore," he called softly. "Everything okay?" No answer. He reached the top of the landing, the carpet damp beneath his shoes from the humidity. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and perfume. He knocked gently on her door. "Miss Moore? It's Frank." Nothing. He pressed his ear to the wood. From inside, he could hear breathing, slow, shallow, just beyond the door. Then a whisper, "Don't let him in." The voice was fragile, cracked, but unmistakably hers. Frank's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He backed away, scanning the lot below through the window. The sedan was back, parked at the far edge again, headlights off, a shadow behind the wheel. He turned to call the sheriff, but the phone line hissed with static. The power flickered. Downstairs, somewhere beyond the glass, the motel sign buzzed faintly, "Vacancy, vacancy, vacancy." Frank gripped the receiver, whispering into it anyway. "Sheriff Jensen, it's Frank. You better come quick." Outside, lightning split the sky for the briefest second, and in that flash, he saw the man in the trench coat standing beneath room 9's window. Looking up, waiting. The drive back to Hollow Creek felt like descending into a nightmare that refused to end. The winding mountain road was wrapped in fog. so thick it seemed alive, swirling and pulsing around Detective Claire Morales' car as if trying to keep her out. The rhythmic wipers cut through the mist, but even they couldn't dispel the unease that clung to her. It had been 10 years since the Hollow Creek murders. 10 years since she'd sworn she'd never come back. Yet here she was, drawn by the strange phone call she received the night before. One that had carried only 3 words before the line went dead. She's still here. The voice had sounded like static, distant, but familiar. And the thing that chilled her most was that it sounded exactly like Anna Holloway, the last girl killed at Halloween. Clara tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She'd spent months chasing Anna's killer, chasing shadows through the forest, sifting through whispers of witchcraft, cults, and sacrifices. But when the case went cold, she left, haunted by the one victim she could never save. As she crossed the rickety wooden bridge that led into the town, the sign came into view, faded and crooked. Welcome to Hollow Creek. Population 201, most of the time. Someone had scrawled that last part in red paint years ago. The town never bothered to clean it. The streets were empty now, as if the whole town had gone to sleep and forgotten to wake up. Pumpkins still sat on porches, their carved faces caved in and moldy. Halloween had been 2 nights ago, but in Hollow Creek, it looked like it never left. Clara parked in front of the sheriff's station, a squat building with peeling white paint and one flickering light above the door. As she stepped out, her boots crunched over dead leaves, the air sharp with the smell of rotten pine. Inside, she was met by Sheriff Dale Hargrove, a man who once believed in ghosts only after they took something from him. His eyes were tired, his jaw unshaven. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again, Morales," he muttered. "Didn't plan to come back," she replied, shaking off the chill. "But I got a call. About Anna." The sheriff's face tightened. "We buried that girl 10 years ago." Clara met his eyes. "Then why did she just call me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a file across the desk. "You might want to see this." Inside were photos, recent ones, taken just 2 nights ago. They showed a small farmhouse on the edge of the woods, lit only by a porch light. But in one image, a figure stood behind the window, pale and unmoving, a girl in a white nightgown. "Taken by one of the trick-or-treaters," the sheriff said, rubbing the back of his neck. Said he saw a light in the old Holloway place. "That house has been empty since, well, you know." Clara studied the photo. The face in the window was blurry, but unmistakable. It was Anna Holloway. Her stomach turned cold. "You checked the house?" "Next morning," the sheriff said. "No one there. Just candles. Everywhere. And the smell of blood." The room seemed to darken as the words hung in the air. Clara stood, her instincts prickling. "Show me." They drove through the mist again, this time following the dirt road that led into the forest. The trees leaned over the path, their skeletal branches forming arches that blocked out the moonlight. Every mile deeper made the radio static grow louder. Finally, the headlights hit the Holloway house, a weathered structure with sagging eaves and boarded windows. It looked more like a wound in the earth than a home. Clara stepped out, flashlight in hand, heart thudding. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes, soft laughter, like children playing far away. She pushed open the door, and it groaned in protest. Inside, the floorboards creaked beneath her boots. The air was thick with the smell of wax and something coppery. Candles lined the walls, melted into strange shapes. Symbols were drawn on the floor in ash and dried blood. And in the center of the room stood a single wooden chair with a child's ribbon tied around it. Clara knelt down. The ribbon was pale blue, frayed at the edges, exactly like the one Anna wore the night she vanished. Her flashlight flickered. Then, from somewhere upstairs, came the faint sound of a music box. The same tune Anna's mother said she played every night before bed. Clara froze, every instinct screaming to leave. But she moved toward the stairs, her flashlight shaking. Step by step, she climbed, the melody growing louder, sweeter, wrong. At the top, she saw the room. The light from her beam swept across cracked wallpaper, an old bed, and a figure sitting in the corner, the girl in the nightgown. "Anna," Clara whispered. The girl's head tilted, slowly, too slowly. Then she smiled, her eyes black as ink. "Welcome back, detective." And before Clara could move, the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her in the dark. The slam of the door echoed through the house like a gunshot. Dust rained from the ceiling as Clara spun around, her flashlight beam darting across the cracked walls. The door handle rattled, locked from the outside. Her breath quickened. "Anna," she whispered again, her voice trembling between disbelief and fear. The girl stood motionless in the corner, head tilted at that same unnatural angle, nightgown rippling slightly, though there was no breeze. The music box beside her played its tune over and over, slow, distorted, like the melody was rotting with time. Clara took a careful step forward, her gun hand steady even as her heart pounded. "If someone's here with you, step into the light." The girl didn't move, but something else did. From behind the walls came the sound of shuffling feet. Then whispers, hundreds of them, low and urgent, like a swarm of insects reciting a prayer. Clara swept her light across the room. The shadows seemed to breathe. "Who's there?" she barked. The whispers stopped, and then a laugh. It wasn't a child's laugh this time. It was deep, hollow, echoing through the house from everywhere at once. Clara's instinct screamed get out, but the detective in her refused. She stepped closer to the girl, every nerve on edge. "Anna, I'm Detective Morales. I came back because—" The girl raised her head. Her mouth moved, but the voice that came out wasn't her own. It was Clara's. "You left me here." Clara froze. "What did you say?" "You promised you'd find me," the voice continued, her own words thrown back at her. "But you stopped looking." The flashlight flickered again. When it steadied, the girl was gone. The chair was empty. The music box clicked once, then stopped. A cold draft swept through the room, and when Clara turned, she saw writing spreading across the wallpaper, like ink bleeding through paper. She never left. She stumbled backward, bumping into the dresser. On it lay a photograph, old, yellowed, edges burned. It showed Anna standing in front of the house, smiling, holding her mother's hand. But someone had scratched the mother's face out, leaving deep gouges through the paper. Clara's radio crackled on her belt. Static hissed, and then Sheriff Hargrove's voice came through, faint and breaking up. "R.A., you where?" "I'm outside." Saw a window, not alone. Then silence. "Sheriff?" she said into the radio. "Come again." Only static replied. She bolted for the door, shoulder checking it until the old wood gave way with a splintering crack. The hallway outside was darker than before. The candles downstairs had all gone out. Only the faint, dying glow of the moon slipped through the boards. Her footsteps echoed down the stairs, each creak louder than the last. Halfway down, something cold brushed her shoulder. She spun, shining the flashlight upward. Nothing there, but the air was thick, almost liquid, and she could feel someone behind her. A voice whispered in her ear, close enough that she felt the breath. "You shouldn't have come back." Clara turned and fired, one shot into the darkness. The flash lit up the hallway for a split second, and in that flash, she saw them. Dozens of faces staring back, pale, eyeless, their mouths moving in silent screams. Victims, every one of them. The faces vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving only silence. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. Her mind was spinning, her pulse deafening in her ears. Hallucination? Gas leak? Trauma flashback? Anything was better than believing what she'd just seen. She reached the bottom of the stairs, pushing through the doorway into the living room, only to find it completely different. The room was pristine. No candles, no symbols, no blood. Everything looked normal. A single lamp glowed in the corner. On the couch sat a man she recognized instantly. Daniel Holloway, Anna's father, except he'd been dead for 8 years. He smiled at her, calm, polite, as though nothing were strange about the situation. "Detective Morales, you finally made it." Clara's blood ran cold. "You're not real." He chuckled softly. "That's what they said about her, too." "Why are you here?" she demanded. "To finish what we started." Clara raised her gun. You killed your daughter. You and your wife performed that ritual, trying to bring her mother back after the accident. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming in the dim light. You don't understand, detective. We didn't bring her back. She brought us. The light bulb above him shattered, plunging the room into darkness. A dozen whispers rose again, this time not from the walls, but from beneath the floorboards. The ground trembled. A shape moved on the carpet, crawling toward her. Clara fired again, hitting nothing. The sound of laughter filled the house, echoing, growing louder and louder until it became a scream. And then silence. The lights flickered back on. She was alone. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare. The window that had once looked out to the forest was now bricked over. Clara's heart raced. None of this is real, she told herself. It can't be. But then she saw it. Something glinting in the corner of the room. The same blue ribbon. The one she found upstairs. Only now it was tied around a key. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The key was old, heavy, with a symbol carved into it. A circle of thorns around a crescent moon. And burned into the floor, beneath her feet, were words she hadn't noticed before. The door opens only for the lost. Her flashlight flickered once more, and this time a faint light appeared in the hallway beyond. A door she hadn't seen before. It was open, and from it came the faint sound of breathing. Not hers. Clara stood frozen at the threshold of the hallway, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The door at the far end seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, faint light spilling from the cracks around its frame. The breathing on the other side was steady, human, but too slow, too deliberate. She tightened her grip on the gun. Every instinct screamed to leave, but something deeper, some need for closure, pulled her forward. Each step echoed like a drumbeat down the long, narrow corridor. The wallpaper peeled in jagged strips, the air growing colder with every breath. When she reached the door, she hesitated. The brass handle was ice cold, slick with something that smelled faintly metallic. She lifted the old key she found tied to Anna's ribbon and slid it into the lock. Click! The door creaked open. Behind it was a staircase leading down into pitch-black darkness. The faint light from her flashlight barely reached the bottom. It wasn't on the house's blueprints. Clara had studied them years ago. This place wasn't supposed to exist. She took a deep breath and descended. The first few steps groaned beneath her boots, and with every one she took, the air grew thicker, heavier, charged with something electric. When she finally reached the bottom, she found herself in what looked like an old root cellar. Stone walls slick with moisture, a single table in the center covered in wax drippings and black candles. On the table lay a large leather-bound book, its cover etched with the same symbol as the key, a circle of thorns around a crescent moon. She approached slowly, brushing the dust away. The pages inside were filled with strange markings and Latin prayers. But what caught her attention was a drawing. A woman with hollow eyes, standing over a child in a white gown. Underneath, in faded handwriting, it read, "The hollow one shall keep what was promised." Clara frowned. She turned the page, and her stomach dropped. There was a sketch of the Holloway house. The same room upstairs. The same symbol she had seen drawn in blood on the floor. And beneath it, a list of names, every victim from the Hollow Creek murders, including Anna's. But then, one more name had been added in fresh ink. Clara Morales. Her hands went cold. She stepped back instinctively. The ground beneath her shifted with a faint groan. Then she heard it again, the music box. It was faint at first, distant, echoing down the staircase she'd just come from. The same haunting lullaby. "Anna," Clara called out, her voice trembling. No answer, only the song. She drew her flashlight toward the stairs, but instead of steps, she saw dirt. The staircase was gone, replaced by a solid wall of earth. She was trapped. The flashlight flickered. Then a whisper, soft and childlike. "You shouldn't have read it." Clara spun around. The little girl stood behind the table again. Anna, her face pale, eyes bottomless. "You're dead," Clara whispered. Anna tilted her head. "So are you." The light went out. Darkness swallowed her whole. The only thing she could hear was her own breathing, and something else, just behind her shoulder. She raised her gun, firing blindly. The sound exploded in the small space, echoing until her ears rang. When the flash from the gun faded, she saw movement in the corners. Dozens of shapes pressed against the stone walls. Arms, faces, clawing at the surface from the inside. They were in the walls. The voices came next, hundreds of them overlapping, whispering her name, begging, laughing. Detective Morales. You left her. You promised. Clara stumbled backward until her back hit the cold wall. What do you want from me? She screamed. Anna's voice rose above the rest. You said you'd find me. You said you wouldn't stop until I was home. Clara's throat tightened. I tried. But you forgot me, Anna said softly, stepping closer. Her face flickered between a child's and something skeletal. Now you'll remember forever. The candles on the table burst into flame. Shadows stretched up the walls, writhing and twisting into human forms. The ground shook, and from beneath the table, something began to rise, a dark shape, long and thin, wearing a crown of broken branches. Its face was nothing but a hole, black and endless, the hollow one. Its voice was a whisper that made her bones ache. Every promise broken feeds a hollow. Clara backed away, gun raised, but the air felt thick, like moving through water. She fired again. Click. Empty. The figure reached for her, its fingers brushing her chest. Cold as a grave. Images flashed through her mind. Anna laughing, Anna running, Anna screaming in the woods as the ritual burned around her. The hollow one spoke again, each word like a knife in her head. To find her, you must take her place. And then Anna smiled. Stay with me. The ground beneath Clara's feet cracked open. Darkness spilled upward like smoke, swallowing her from the ankles up. She screamed, clawing at the air as the cellar filled with blinding white light. The last thing she saw was Anna's small hand reaching out, resting gently against hers. Then silence. When Clara opened her eyes, she was standing in the upstairs room again. Morning light streamed through the boarded windows. The house was quiet. Dust floated in the air like snow. The blue ribbon still lay on the floor. Her gun, her flashlight, gone. And when she looked at the mirror on the wall, her breath caught. The reflection staring back wasn't her own. It was Anna's. Morning broke over Hollow Creek, but the fog refused to lift. It hung low across the trees like a living thing, muffling sound, swallowing light. Sheriff Dale Hargrove parked his truck at the edge of the Holloway property, the old engine ticking softly in the cold air. He hadn't slept since the night Clara went inside that house. He'd waited, called her radio again and again. Nothing but static. Now, standing at the gate, he felt the same pressure in his chest he'd felt 10 years ago, the night the Holloway murder stopped. Or so he thought. He stepped through the rusted gate, boots crunching over frost-laced grass. The Holloway house loomed ahead, its silhouette warped by the fog, its roof sagging like the bones of something long dead. "Clara?" he called, voice echoing through the trees. "Morales, you in there?" No answer. He adjusted his flashlight, the beam cutting through the mist as he climbed the porch steps. The boards creaked under his weight. The front door hung slightly ajar. He drew his pistol. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, smelling of mold and something faintly sweet, like burnt wax. The room was empty, except for a single chair in the corner and a broken music box on the floor. He bent to pick it up. The small porcelain ballerina inside was missing an arm. When he wound it, it didn't play, not at first. But after a moment, it began to turn, releasing a slow, off-key melody. The same tune he'd heard about in Clara's old reports. The one Anna Holloway had played before she disappeared. Dale's heart thudded. "Clara," he whispered. He moved deeper into the house. The floor was covered in dust, but there, near the stairs, were fresh footprints. Small ones. Barefoot, he followed them up. The steps moaned under his boots, the sound stretching through the empty house. At the top, the hallway split left and right. The prints went left, toward the last room at the end. He reached the door and pushed it open. The smell hit him first, iron and rot. His flashlight swept the walls. Symbols were smeared in dried blood, curling shapes that made no sense to the eye but felt wrong to look at. The ribbon Clara had described in her reports lay on the floor, tied around an old iron key. His radio crackled on his shoulder, sudden and sharp. He nearly jumped. "Sheriff, come in." He grabbed it. "This is Hargrove. I'm inside the Holloway house. I've got signs of Morales." "Copy." Static. Then a faint voice, distant, hollow. "She's here." Dale froze. "Who is this?" The radio hissed again. "She's one of us now." He dropped the radio, stumbling back. His flashlight flickered, then went out. The room plunged into darkness. "God damn it," he muttered, tapping it until it blinked back on. And that's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was Clara. She stood by the window, her back to him, hair loose, wearing a long coat. "Clara?" he breathed, relief flooding him. The figure didn't move. He took a step closer. "Hey, it's me, Hargrove. Let's get out of here." The figure turned slowly. Not Clara. Anna Holloway. Her eyes were black, her face pale and waxy, mouth curling into a slow, unnatural smile. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. He raised his pistol, heart hammering. "Stay where you are." Anna tilted her head. "You came for her." "Where is she?" Dale barked. The girl's lips parted, revealing blood on her teeth. "She's downstairs." And then she vanished. The room went cold. Dale backed out into the hallway, his breath misting in the air. Somewhere below, a door creaked open. He descended the stairs, gun drawn, every nerve on fire. "Clara," he shouted. "If you can hear me, answer." The house groaned in reply. He reached the living room. The floorboards had split apart, forming a jagged hole where a staircase led down into the basement. A basement that shouldn't have been there. He hesitated, staring into blackness. A faint glow pulsed below, like candlelight. "Clara," he whispered again. Then he heard it, her voice. "Dale, help me." Relief and dread twisted together in his chest. "Hang on, Morales, I'm coming." He climbed down, each step slick with damp earth. The air was thick, heavy, humming with low whispers. When he reached the bottom, his light swept across the stone walls. He froze. The cellar was lined with mirrors, dozens of them, cracked and fogged, reflecting his light in broken shards. In each reflection, his own face stared back, but behind him, just for a moment, he saw her, Clara, standing in the reflection. "Clara?" he breathed, turning around. No one there. He turned back to the mirror. This time, she was closer. "Leave," she mouthed. Then, in one horrifying instant, her reflection pressed her hands against the glass from the inside. "Get out!" she screamed. The mirror shattered all at once, exploding outward. Dale stumbled back as shards rained across the floor. The air filled with whispers, growing louder, dozens of voices overlapping, chanting words he couldn't understand. Then, from the darkness behind him, came slow, deliberate footsteps. He turned his light. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Clara. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her voice soft and distant. "You shouldn't have come, Dale." He lowered the gun, relief flooding him again. "Jesus, Morales, you're alive. Let's get out of here." She shook her head. "It won't let us." "What?" "The Hollow One. It feeds on those who remember. And now you remember too." Before he could speak, the ground shuddered. The lights went out. And in the pitch black, something vast moved behind him. Something breathing, ancient and heavy. The last thing he heard was Clara's whisper in his ear. "Run." Then everything went black. The rain had stopped, but the air outside still smelled like wet earth and ash. The mist hung heavy over Hollow Creek, twisting around the trees like pale fingers reaching for the sky. Inside the old Willowmere house, the flickering light from a single lantern threw long, trembling shadows across the walls. Detective Harris stood near the parlor window, his face pale, eyes dark with exhaustion. The night's revelations were eating at him. For years, he'd blamed himself for the fire that killed those 7 children back in 1995. But now, after finding those bodies buried beneath the floorboards, after hearing Ethan's terrified confession. It was clear something darker had been at play all along. Ethan sat in the corner, shivering. His clothes were still damp, his eyes red from crying. He'd been the one who called the detective back to town after all these years. "I didn't mean to open it," he whispered, voice trembling. "I just wanted to know if the stories were true." Detective Harris turned to face him. "What stories?" he asked softly. Ethan looked up, his face pale under the weak lantern glow. "The stories about her," he said. "About the woman who lived here before the orphanage was built. They said she lost her child one Halloween night and made a promise to bring him back." The detective frowned. "You mean Margaret Willowmere?" Ethan nodded. "She wasn't just a grieving mother, detective. She was something else. They said she tried to use forbidden rituals. And the children," his voice cracked, "the children were offerings." Harris felt his stomach twist. The name Willowmere had been buried deep in the town's history books, mentioned only in passing. But now, standing inside her decaying home, the air thick with the scent of mold and smoke, he could almost feel her presence. Suddenly, the lantern flickered. A gust of cold air swept through the room, rattling the broken window panes. Ethan's breath hitched. "She's here," he whispered. Harris's hand went instinctively to his gun. "Stay behind me," he ordered. But as he took a step forward, the floor beneath him creaked, loud, deliberate, like footsteps that didn't belong to either of them. The lantern flickered again and then went out completely, plunging the room into total darkness. For a long, suffocating moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, softly, from somewhere in the room, a woman's voice began to hum. It was a lullaby, low and broken, yet hauntingly familiar. Harris froze. "Ethan," he whispered, "where's that coming from?" I don't know," Ethan stammered, gripping the edge of a dusty table. "It sounds like—" Before he could finish, the voice grew louder. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, echoing through the wood, rising and falling like a morning chant. Harris raised his flashlight and swept a beam across the room. The light caught on something, writing, carved into the plaster. "He will return when the last flame dies." The word sent chills down his spine. He reached out, running his fingers over the grooves. They were old, maybe a century old. Ethan began to cry quietly. "I shouldn't have come back here," he said. "She made me see them. The children, they follow me home. Every night." Harris turned toward him sharply. "What do you mean?" Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "I can hear them whispering, Detective. They want justice and they want her gone. But she won't leave. She's waiting for Halloween night, tonight." The detective's flashlight flickered once more, and in that brief strobe of light, he saw them, small handprints smeared across the dusty walls, too small to belong to Ethan or himself. "Dear God," he muttered. Then the humming stopped. The silence that followed was so deep it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. A low creak came from the staircase. Step by step, something was descending. Ethan's body tensed. He clutched the lantern tightly, though it was long dead. "She's coming," he whispered. The detective aimed his flashlight toward the stairs. The beam caught a glimpse of something white, like a figure draped in tattered fabric, gliding slowly down. But as soon as he blinked, it was gone. Harris's heart hammered in his chest. "Ethan, listen to me," he said, his voice steady but low. "We have to finish this. Whatever she started, we end it tonight." Ethan looked terrified but nodded. "There's something in the basement," he said. "That's where the rituals took place. That's where she buried her child." The detective exhaled shakily. "Then that's where we go." They moved toward the back of the house, the floor groaning under their feet. The basement door was still scorched black from a fire decades ago. When Harris grabbed the handle, it felt ice cold, colder than the air around them. He pulled it open. A heavy wave of stale air rolled out, carrying the faint scent of burnt candles and decay. Ethan hesitated. "She won't let us leave if we go down there." Harris glanced back at him, eyes determined. "Then we make sure she doesn't follow us out." Together, they descended into the darkness. The stairs moaned with every step, and as they reached the bottom, the detective's flashlight flickered over a small altar covered in melted wax, children's toys, and a single charred photograph of a woman holding a baby. In the distance, that same lullaby began again, only this time, it wasn't from the walls. It was right behind them. Ethan turned, eyes wide. "Detective," he whispered. But before Harris could move, the temperature in the room dropped to freezing. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming the faint outline of a woman, her eyes hollow, her lips trembling as she whispered. "He was all I had." The lantern exploded into sparks, and the darkness swallowed them whole. The morning after the storm, Hollow Creek looked almost peaceful. The fog was gone, the air crisp with the scent of pine and wet soil. Birds were beginning to return, their songs timid, as if afraid of breaking the silence. But Detective Harris didn't hear them. He was standing outside the ruins of the Willowmere house, staring at the ashes still smoldering in patches of earth. His clothes smelled of smoke, his eyes hollow from sleeplessness. Beside him, Ethan sat on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket. His face was pale, lips trembling. He hadn't said a word since they escaped the basement hours ago, when the candle had gone out and Margaret Willowmere's ghost finally faded into nothingness. Or so they thought. Harris's mind was a storm. The words Margaret had spoken, "They burned my home to hide what they'd done," echoed through him. For years, the fire that destroyed the orphanage was marked as accidental. Faulty wiring, they said, but the basement, the carvings, the bones, everything he'd seen screamed otherwise. He needed answers. "Ethan," he said quietly, stepping closer, "you told me you found old records before you called me back here. Where are they?" Ethan looked up slowly, eyes clouded. "In the church," he whispered, "under the chapel floor. I was cleaning the archives when I found a hidden compartment. There were old ledgers, letters, even photos. That's what made me come here in the first place." "The church," Harris repeated, a cold realization dawning on him. "St. Peter's?" Ethan nodded. "The same one that ran the orphanage." The detective's jaw tightened. The same priest Margaret accused in her final words. He grabbed his coat, ignoring the ache in his body. "We're going there," he said. The church stood on the hill overlooking the town, its white spire cutting through the morning haze like a blade. Inside, everything was still, too still. The faint scent of incense lingered in the air, masking something older, something sour beneath. Father Matthews, an elderly man with weary eyes, greeted them at the door. "Detective Harris," he said in a voice too calm. "I heard about the fire last night. Terrible thing. That house was cursed long before you arrived." Harris studied him. "You've been here a long time, Father. You remember the orphanage." The priest hesitated. "I was just a young curate then. I remember the tragedy. God rest those souls. But not the truth behind it," Harris said flatly. Matthews blinked. "Excuse me? You heard me. Margaret Willowmere didn't start that fire." The priest's face tightened. "That's a dangerous claim to make, Detective." "Not as dangerous as what's been hidden," Harris snapped. He stepped closer. "Where are the records from that time? The files, the ledgers, anything the church kept on the orphanage?" The priest's eyes darted toward the back of the sanctuary, toward the small door that led to the storage chambers below. "Those are sealed. Old, fragile documents." "I'll take my chances," Harris said, brushing past him. The stairs creaked as he descended into the undercroft. Dust floated in the dim light from a single bulb overhead. Shelves lined the walls, boxes stacked high, labeled with fading ink. He scanned them quickly. Donations, birth records, parish reports. Then one box caught his eye. It was unmarked. He pulled it down, coughing as dust rose like smoke. Inside were several leather-bound ledgers and a stack of old photographs, their edges burned. The first photo stopped him cold. It showed a group of priests standing outside the orphanage, smiling, proud, and beside them, a woman holding a baby, Margaret Willowmere. On the back, written in neat ink, "Willowmere Dedication, 1892. But tucked beneath it was another photo, almost identical, except the woman and the baby were missing, torn away. Ethan stood beside him, shivering. "Detective, what is this?" Harris flipped opened one of the ledgers. His heart dropped. The pages were filled with lists, names of orphans, dates of arrival, notes beside each name. But some lines had been crossed out with heavy black ink. At the bottom of one page, written faintly in pencil, "Removed for ritual." He stared at the words, disbelief turning to fury. "They were using the children," he whispered. It wasn't Margaret's doing at all. The priests, they were conducting their own twisted rites, claiming it was for purification. Ethan backed away. "Oh, God." From behind them, a voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come down here." It was Father Matthews. He was holding a small cross, but there was something off about his eyes, something cold. "You don't understand, Detective," the priest said softly. "We had to cleanse the corruption. The children were marked. Margaret was only the vessel. She agreed at first, but when she tried to stop us," he sighed, "the fire was unfortunate. You burned them alive." Harris roared. Matthews didn't flinch. Their souls were saved. Harris drew his gun. "You buried the truth for a century, but it ends now." The priest smiled faintly. "No, Detective, it never ends. The ritual demands remembrance. You think blowing out one candle ends a covenant sealed in blood." Before Harris could respond, the lights flickered. A low hum filled the air. Ethan stumbled backward as the air grew thick, suffocating. From the corner of the room, a candle lit itself. Then another, then 7 more. The priest began to whisper in Latin, his voice trembling. "Ad lucem per sanguinum, per sacrificium innocentium." "Stop it," Harris shouted. But it was too late. The flames rose high, flickering like living things. The shadows of the children reappeared, faint but visible, their faces empty, their eyes burning faintly blue. Father Matthews fell to his knees, hands raised. "They return. The covenant is fulfilled." Ethan screamed. The ghostly figure surged toward the priest. The candles exploded, the room filling with the sound of wailing. Centuries of pain unleashed all at once. When the light cleared, Father Matthews was gone. Only ashes remained where he had stood. Harris lowered his weapon, trembling. "Dear God!" Ethan's voice shook. "Detective, look." On the wall behind the altar, a new carving had appeared in the soot. The last flame was never mine. The detective stared at it for a long time, his breath fogging in the cold air. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. The curse had shifted, and somewhere in the ruins of Willowmere House, a single candle flickered back to life. The drive back from the church was silent. No radio, no chatter, just the softest of the tires cutting to the fog that had crept back over Hollow Creek like a ghostly tide. The town was waking, unaware that something had just been unleashed beneath its church, a secret that had waited a century to breathe again. Detective Harris gripped the steering wheel tighter. His knuckles were white, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the image of the ashes on the church floor, the priest's last words echoing in his head. "The covenant is fulfilled." Ethan sat beside him, shivering, clutching a small rosary in his hands. He hadn't spoken since the explosion of light in the church basement. Every few seconds, his lips moved in silent prayer, though his eyes were unfocused, haunted. They reached the police station just as the sun broke through mist, a weak, watery light that offered no comfort. The small town building felt alien, hollow, even in daylight. Harris led Ethan inside, past the empty desks and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. "Sit here," Harris said, motioning to a chair. "I'll get us some coffee." He walked into his office, closed the door, and leaned against it, exhaling shakily. On his desk lay the box he'd taken from the church, still half filled with ledgers and photographs. He hadn't dared to open it again since they fled. But now, something about it seemed wrong. The lid had shifted. He froze. He remembered sealing it shut with police tape before leaving. Slowly, he stepped forward and peeled back the flap. Inside, the ledgers were gone. In their place lay a single candle, half melted, its wax black as tar, and a note. The handwriting was old-fashioned, flowing, and unmistakable. Every soul must remember its fire. Harris's throat tightened. He picked up the candle carefully, and the wax felt warm, as though it had been burning moments ago. A drop of it fell to the desk and hissed softly, releasing a faint whiff of smoke. That was when the lights flickered. He looked up sharply. The ceiling lamps dimmed, then brightened again, stuttering like a dying heartbeat. Through the glass of his office window, he saw Ethan still sitting outside, staring blankly at the floor. But something was wrong. A dark shape stood behind him. "Ethan!" Harris shouted, bursting out the door. The boy turned, startled, but there was no one behind him, only the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. "Detective?" Ethan's voice trembled. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Harris blinked, his pulse hammering. The shadow was gone. "Nothing," he muttered, though he didn't believe it himself. Just stay close, all right?" He sat down across from the boy. "Listen, Ethan, whatever we saw in that church, it wasn't over. That ritual wasn't broken. It was released." Ethan's eyes widened. "Released?" Harris nodded grimly. If those priests sealed something in blood, then Margaret's spirit wasn't the only one bound to that place. That flame, the one that keeps relighting, it's passing on, like it's looking for a new vessel. Ethan's face went pale. A new vessel? Before Harris could answer, his radio crackled to life. "Unit 12, we got a situation out by County Road 6, came the dispatcher's shaky voice. "Old Miller barn's on fire. Locals swear they heard children laughing inside before the blaze." Harris froze. County Road 6. That was barely 2 miles from Willowmere House. He grabbed his coat and motioned for Ethan to follow. "Stay in the car this time," he said, voice hard. "Whatever's happening, we end it now." The barn was a skeleton of smoke and flame when they arrived. The air reeked of burning hay and something metallic. Old blood, maybe. Firefighters were shouting, spraying water into the blaze, but the flames didn't behave normally. They twisted in patterns, spiraling upward like grasping hands. One of the men turned to Harris, face pale behind his soot-streaked mask. "We can't control it," he shouted. "It's burning against the wind." Harris's stomach dropped. The curse. It had found fuel. He stepped closer, shielding his face from the heat. Through the flames, he saw something moving, a faint silhouette, small, human-shaped. A child, then another, then 7. Their outlines flickered like candlelight. "Dear God," Harris whispered. The fire suddenly died. Just like that, gone. Smoke drifted into the dawn air, leaving only the scorched outline of the barn's foundation. The firefighter lowered his hose, shaking. "It's out," he said. "But how the hell?" A sound cut him off. Laughter. Soft, distant, echoing across the empty field. Ethan stepped out of the car despite Harris's warning. "Detective," he called. "Look." In the ashes, 7 small handprints glowed faintly, pulsing like embers. Then one by one they faded. Harris approached cautiously. His boot brushed against something half buried in the soot. A charred photo. He picked it up. It was the same orphanage photo from the church, only now the torn section, the missing mother and baby, had reappeared, except the woman's face was no longer Margaret Willowmere's. It was Ethan's mother. Harris's eyes widened in horror. "Ethan," he whispered, "where's your mother buried?" Ethan looked confused. "She's not buried," he said slowly. "She disappeared when I was little. They said she went missing after working at the church." The detective's blood ran cold. "Oh my God!" The pieces snapped together. The timing, the connection, the candle that followed Ethan from the archives. The curse hadn't been chasing him. It had been following her bloodline, and now it found its heir. The ground beneath them trembled. The ashes stirred, spiraling upward into a thin column of smoke. Harris grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him back toward the car. "Run!" he shouted. But before they could move, the smoke twisted, and from within it a whisper came. "He will return when the last flame dies." Ethan screamed as a candle in Harris's coat pocket burst into flame, burning through the fabric without consuming it. The same black wax, the same impossible fire. Harris threw it to the ground and stomped it out, his heart hammering. But even as the light faded, the whisper lingered, carried by the wind, spreading across the valley. In the distance, other lights began to flicker to life. One in a farmhouse window, another in an old well, another in the church. One by one, candles lit themselves across Hollow Creek. The curse had left the house. Now it belonged to the town. The cold morning light spilled over the charred ruins of the Monroe house. Firefighters moved like ghosts through the smoke, their faces streaked with soot and disbelief. It wasn't just a fire. They could all feel it. Something darker had happened here. Something that didn't belong to this world. Detective Claire Monroe stood at the edge of the smoldering wreckage, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her brother's old house, now nothing more than blackened timbers and twisted metal. The place she had avoided for so long had finally consumed itself. As the last flames hissed out, Claire's partner, Detective Ruiz, approached, holding a burnt photograph in his gloved hand. The image was barely visible, but Claire could make out a smiling woman holding a baby. Her sister-in-law, Evelyn, and little Abby. Her throat tightened. She hadn't seen that picture in years. Ruiz lowered his voice. "Claire, the fire investigators say something strange. The ignition point was the attic, but there were handprints, small ones, all over the walls up there, ash white, like they were pressed on the inside of the wood." Claire's eyes widened. "Handprints." He nodded. They said it looked like a child tried to claw her way out. A chill slithered down Claire's spine. No, that can't be. She stared at the remains of the attic window, half melted, the glass warped. Her mind flashed back to the stories. The babysitter's screams, the whispers of a crying girl in night, the strange lights people had seen through the trees. And then she remembered the tape, the one they found inside the old toy chest. She pulled it from her coat pocket. The label was half burned, but one word remained. Abby. Ruiz frowned. "You really think it's smart to play that thing?" Claire's eyes were hollow. "We have to know." Hours later, back at the station, the tape rolled inside an old VCR. The static filled the room, sharp and uneasy. Then an image appeared. It was the old Monroe living room, filmed years ago. Her brother, Daniel, sat in front of the camera, his face pale, his eyes desperate. "Whoever finds this," he began, his voice trembling, "you have to understand. We didn't mean to hurt her. It was an accident. But she wouldn't go away." He turned the camera toward the hallway. The faint outline of a small girl appeared, her hair hanging over her face. The lights flickered and the screen crackled. Daniel's voice broke into sobs. "Abby, please let us rest." The camera fell sideways as a deafening crash erupted. Then static. Ruiz stared at the screen. That's your niece?" Claire couldn't speak. Her hand covered her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "She was just 8. Ruiz rewound the tape, his expression darkening. "There's something else." He paused at the last frame, barely visible through distortion. There, behind Daniel's slumped body, stood a shadowy figure. Not a child, but a woman. Her face burned, her eyes hollow. "Evelyn," Ruiz whispered. "She's still in there." That night, Claire returned to the ruins alone. The moon hung low, a pale scar in the sky. She walked among the ashes, guided by the faint sound of a lullaby drifting through the trees. The same song Evelyn used to sing to Abby. Her flashlight flickered. The beam danced across the scorched floorboards until it landed on something glinting faintly beneath the soot, a silver locket. She picked it up, brushed off the ashes, and opened it. Inside were 2 tiny photos, Evelyn and Abby. A cold wind rose. The trees shivered. Then she heard it. "Mommy?" Claire froze. The voice was soft, childlike, but hollow, like it came from deep underground. "Abby," she whispered. The air around her grew thick, heavy. She turned slowly. There, standing by the blackened doorway, was a small figure, her nightgown tattered, her hair matted with soot, her eyes empty. Claire's flashlight shook. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for what happened." The little girl tilted her head. "He locked me in the attic." Claire's heart cracked. I know, sweetheart, but you can rest now. You don't have to stay here anymore." Abby stepped closer. The air around her shimmered with heat, like flickering embers. Her tiny hand reached out and touched Claire's cheek. For a second, warmth filled the detective's chest. A memory surfaced. Abby's laughter in the backyard, her hand sticky from melted ice cream. Then the warmth vanished. Abby smiled faintly. "Tell Mommy I found the light." And just like that, she was gone. The night fell silent. Claire dropped to her knees, clutching the locket to her heart. Tears streamed down her face as the first snowflakes began to fall over the ruins. The Monroe house was finally torn down a month later. In its place, the town built a small memorial garden, a quiet patch of peace where wildflowers now grow among the ashes. Detective Claire Monroe visits every year on Halloween night. She brings 2 lilies, one for Evelyn and one for Abby, and leaves them by the old oak tree that somehow survived the fire. Some say if you pass by after midnight, you can hear a child's laughter carried softly by the wind, followed by a woman's whisper, "Thank you for setting us free." And somewhere beyond the veil of life and death, the house is finally quiet.